Good morning. This is week 13 of the Cultural Geography of the United Kingdom, and today it's time to talk about British cuisine. Some of the slides that I'm going to show you I borrowed from my first year introduction to the cultural studies lecture series, so you may remember them, but especially if we talk about food and food studies, I think it's relevant, and it's a good idea to remind ourselves of some concepts that you hopefully remember from the first year, like the concept of synchronic and diachronic analysis. So synchronic analysis it's the analysis of something like language, culture, but also food in different geographical locations or social groups at the same time. So this is mostly what we are going to do today. We are going to look at the map of the United Kingdom and some regional foods, perhaps typical national foods for Britain as a whole, perhaps more regional or even localized to individual towns or smaller areas. So this is synchronic analysis. Diachronic analysis is the analysis of something in different times. So the same location, different times. Of course, such an approach can be taken to food as well, and we could discuss British cuisine through the perspective of diachronic development. And here we have a slide with some typical new foods or fashionable foods in different historical periods. So from the Celtic cuisine through Roman, medieval, then Tudor, Stuart, so 16th century, 17th century, Georgian cuisine in the 18th century, Victorian cuisine in the 19th century, and to the modern time. And you can see that of course the availability of different foodstuffs was different. So if we look, for example, at the first list from the Celtic times, what people ate normally in Britain was wild animals, which they hunted, fish and shellfish, leafy vegetables, berries, nuts, honey, and some basic forms of grains, mostly in the form of porridge, sometimes simple breads. When the Romans came, they brought with them all kinds of luxury goods from the Mediterranean, and even after the Romans left, those foodstuffs remained, especially with the richer sections of the British society. So what we have then is wine, olive oil, some more fruits and vegetables such as onions, leeks, cucumbers, grapes, cherries, and also many of the spices and herbs which are popular still, such as mint and rosemary, mostly because they did not naturally grow in the British Isles, so they needed to be introduced, and they were introduced by the Romans. Then we have more and more fashions. For example, in the medieval period there was a fashion for sweet and sour sauces, for gingerbread, and all kinds of exotic spices that were brought from distant locations, mostly in Asia. There were all kinds of pastries and pies, which are still, as you will see, quite popular in traditional British cuisine, and the staple food among the rich was roast meat, sometimes very sophisticated recipes like roast swans. Apparently only the the royalty could eat roasted swans. Do you remember swan upping on the River Thames? This is the memory of this time. And then when we move through different historical periods, there is more and more of that. So first cookery books in Tudor period, more spices, more sugar, citrus fruit becomes popular and fashionable, and even some people try to grow it in Britain. In the 17th century, even more sugar, chocolate becomes available and immediately is fashionable. Although initially it was used as a drink, it was prepared as a drink, and actually with wine rather than with milk nowadays. So claret wine, so the wine from Bordeaux. So we have international relations, we have trade relations. These are all the things that are important when we discuss the cuisine and the development of British cuisine in the 18th century. Tea, coffee, potatoes. So of course we start to recognize the staple elements of British diet, especially tea. But as you can see, tea does not feature here before the 18th century. So the same about coffee, the same about potatoes. So yep, more spices, of course. Port wines, so sweet wines from Portugal, start to replace the French type of wine as more popular. Also through the political relations. This is a period of the wars with France, but the relations with Portugal have always been great. King Charles II of the Stuart dynasty married a Portuguese princess. Apparently she was the one who brought tea first to Britain, but it took some decades for the drink to become popularized. What happens in the 19th century? Of course, lots of popular cookery books and sophisticated cuisine centered on presentation. The beautiful presentation of the dishes was more important than the actual tastes. Raw vegetables were avoided. There are all kinds of strange stories, like that tomatoes were supposed to be poisonous and they had to be very carefully processed and never eaten raw because this could be dangerous. We have the first commercial brands of various products, such as, I don't know, Lipton tea, for example. We have first canned products, first chocolate bars. Many of those brands have survived and are still known today. If you watched any of the episodes of the Great British Railway Journeys, you probably know what I mean. The host of the program travels to different places in Britain, and very often he visits the places with some interesting food producing plants or the factories belonging to manufacturers of famous brands, many of them going back to the 19th century. And this short overview of the development of the British cuisine from the diachronic perspective ends in the 20th century with, of course, more and more commercial brands, new technologies like refrigeration in private homes, and of course some fashions, such as an American fashion of dry cereals for breakfast. If you recall the full English breakfast, we are going to talk about that. This is an earlier example in the 20th century. It is replaced by the kind of cereal breakfast, typical mostly for American cuisine, and also food fats like the Mediterranean cuisine in the 1950s, or Japanese cuisine, or Mexican cuisine, or all kinds of fashions. You may ask yourself, what's the fashionable cuisine now? We can talk about it during the live meet. But as I said, we are mostly going to talk about the synchronic perspective now, and here you have a simple map with a few examples, but there is also a wonderful web page I mentioned briefly during the live meet last week, and the name of this web page is Taste Atlas, spelled together, small letters, tasteatlas.com. You have the map of the world. You can actually zoom it in on the location that you want to explore. So, of course, I suggest you zoom it in on the British Isles and perhaps some specific locations within the British Isles. So it could be Scotland, it could be Wales, it could be London, or any other place in Britain, and you have the miniatures of the foods typical for this region. So quite predictably, there will be a lot of cheeses, there will be some breads and fruit, vegetable that is locally grown, quite a lot of desserts and other regional specialties located on the map. You can actually click on any of those miniatures, and you'll get the full information about the product that you chose. We are going to talk about some of them today, but this map is much bigger, and it's kind of fun to explore. So this is something I would like to encourage you to do. Two or three more slides from the introductory lecture. One is about food studies as a sub-branch or branch of cultural studies. So, of course, a lot can be deduced from food, not only, let's say, regional preferences or the historical moment, but lots of things. Generally, eating food fulfills a basic biological need, but different people and different cultures eat different foods, and this is not coincidental. It's based on many factors. Of course, some very simple ones like availability due to climate, agriculture, trade contacts, but there are also culture-specific ingredients, techniques, dishes. There are religious food laws and taboos. There are medical dietary concerns, and also some social issues, such as treating food as a status symbol. So the connection between social class and food, which could be a longer subject in its own right. We'll talk about it in a little moment. And also globalization, commercialization, fashions, food fashions. So some of the foods are connected with that. And how does English cuisine or British cuisine in general fit into that? Traditionally, even I would say 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, Britain was generally perceived as the land without good food. There is a very famous quotation from a satirical book by a man called George Mikesh. He was a Hungarian journalist and writer who moved to Britain. He wrote several satirical books about the British and about the stereotypes, and in one of the books called How to Be a Brit, right after the Second World War. So it's not a very good time for fancy food probably, but this is what he wrote. On the continent, people have good food. In England, they have good table manners. So this is, as you can hopefully notice even now, harking back to the Victorian period, when table manners and presentation was more important than the food itself. Probably the fact that he was writing right after the end of the Second World War, with the rationing still in place, is quite important. Whenever there was some sort of military conflict, Britain was always at a disadvantage because of a basic fact that it is an island, and with a large population, it cannot feed its population without resorting to trade and imports of food. So whenever the trade connections were made more difficult through the war, let's say, or the blockade of the channel, this posed a very real threat of famine. So that's why they had rationing for quite a long time even after the Second World War. So nowadays, I think the reputation of British cuisine has improved, although some of the notorious aspects, like TV dinners, so kind of full prepared ready-made meals for people to be bought in stores and then just reheated and eaten in front of the television, are still known, but I think the reputation is now better. We can talk about the reasons for it. One of the reasons is the popularity of celebrity chefs, such as Jamie Oliver or Nigella Lawson or Gordon Ramsay, and also all kinds of TV programs with people going to interesting places and cooking and exploring the regional foods. One that I remember as particularly interesting and kind of charming in a way was called Two Fat Ladies. It was hosted by Clarissa Dixon Wright and Jennifer Paterson, and these were two rather large middle-aged women traveling the length and breadth of Britain on a motorbike and cooking and exploring regional ingredients. So this is perhaps something to explore if you like this sort of thing, or perhaps something else, perhaps some YouTube channels, perhaps some modern celebrity chefs. I promised to you a little story about the connection between food and social class, and this is the question of English tea, which is traditionally drunk with milk, and the question whether you pour the milk or the tea first. This is actually a class-related question, because in the 18th century, when tea became very popular and all the paraphernalia, including very expensive, delicate china sets for the tea, were also used, and they were a very important status symbol, the really rich people, the aristocracy and the upper class, they could afford best quality china, so there was no danger in pouring the hot liquid, the tea, first and then colder milk, whereas the middle class had slightly worse quality china, which might crack when exposed to heat suddenly, so they developed the custom of pouring milk first, which was cooler, and then adding the hot tea into the milk. It was safer for the cups. So it kind of became associated with the class, and there are some more examples. We might talk about them in a little moment. So Before we move to national cuisine and regional dishes, one more thing: the royal warrant holders. You may recall the concept of the royal warrants when we talked about the monarchy and other symbols, and this is a kind of mark of appreciation, showing that the producer or trader in some foods provides their worth for the royal court, and they are eligible to put the royal coat of arms on their products with the annotation by appointment to Her Majesty the Queen, or some other members of the royal family. It could be the Prince of Wales, it could be the Duke of Edinburgh, well, not anymore because he died, but I guess some of the products that held his royal warrant will still have it for a while, and then they will have to reapply. When the Queen Mother was alive, she was the fourth person who could grant royal warrants. So here we have some famous British brands like Coleman's mustard from Norfolk, from Norwich. We have Worcester sauce, which is a kind of liquid condiment made of spices mostly. Maldon salt, so a type of sea salt, kind of flaky sea salt. Wilkin and Sons Limited, the makers of preserves, and especially orange marmalade, which is a very British thing, actually Scottish by origin, devised in Britain when some trader bought a large supply of oranges from Spain, but they were so cheap because they were bitter. So his very thrifty wife decided not to throw the lot away, but to add sugar and make them into the marmalade. And of course, here we have the most prestigious and famous producer, and also Marmite, which is a kind of bread spread made of yeast extract, so it's quite healthy. It's rich in some relatively rare vitamins. It's one of the foods that you either love or hate. It tastes like a very concentrated soy sauce. If you do not know it, so if you like soy sauce, you may love it. I know some people who love it. I love it actually, and some people who can't bear the taste at all. But these are all royal warrant holders. You may want to find some more examples. Of course, there will be more examples if you wish, but these are the ones that are probably internationally famous and very recognizable around the well, internationally, not only in Britain. So let's now move on to British cuisine proper, and we continue in a moment.